President Obama has requested over $6 billion in emergency funding for Ebola relief efforts in West Africa, and lawmakers in Washington, D.C. have begun to hear testimony from the officials who are responsible for administering those programs. U.S. Agency for International Development Administrator Rajiv Shah said that USAID is drawing down its international disaster assistance funding faster than it has at any point in his tenure. The agency has so far depleted almost half of its $1.1 billion for international disaster assistance, and Shah said that without additional appropriations from Congress, the agency will run out of funding in that account. Some U.S. lawmakers have questioned whether the World Health Organization should be entrusted with such significant funding from the U.S. and others before undergoing significant reforms to its personnel systems. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce condemned what he called cronyism, specifically at the country director level at the World Health Organization, an organization that many feel fumbled the early stages of the Ebola response effort. An historic climate change agreement emerged from President Obama's trip to China this week, including pledges by both countries to cut carbon emissions by at least 20% in the next 2 decades. The announcement builds unprecedented momentum as the world prepares for the 20th Conference of Parties in Lima, Peru next month, and looks forward with great anticipation to the 21st Conference of Parties in Paris next year. While the China-US agreement pertains to domestic carbon emissions in those two countries, it will no doubt impact the transfer of funds from developed to developing countries for things like renewable energy, research and development, and disaster preparedness. Many of the world's multilateral development banks are considering or reconsidering how their policies can and should safeguard against social and environmental harm from their investments. The World Bank is currently on tour for a consultation process on its controversial new safeguards policy, a draft of which was released last summer to much criticism from civil society groups. In coming days, Devex will offer a more comprehensive account of the debate around the World Bank's new safeguards policies and the subsequent flurry of protests and criticisms those policies have raised. For its part, the Asian Development Bank has also reviewed its own safeguards, and in doing so, implicitly criticized the World Bank's revisions as being aspirational and not actual. 1 year ago this week, aid workers and government officials were scrambling to provide relief for Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, one of the strongest typhoons ever recorded. This week, Devex looked back on the humanitarian relief effort that rose to meet that disaster, with a trip to Tacloban and a roundtable discussion with aid workers and government officials to hear how they're continuing to strengthen communities and prepare for or prevent the next disaster in that region. Finally, we're continuing to highlight cutting-edge advances, stubborn challenges, and innovative efforts to make global health around the world work better, more efficiently, and more sustainably in our Healthy Means campaign, which continues next week with a focus on partnerships. Thanks for staying tuned and for sharing your thoughts on these and other breaking stories at devex.com.